Pleased that this meeting has been live streamed. So welcome to the public and to journalists. If I may ask members and officers around the table to introduce themselves, please, for the benefit of those viewing the meeting. I'm Tracy Brabian, the Mayor of West Yorkshire.
I'm Ben Steele, Managing Director of the Combined Authority.
Caroline Allen, Head of Legal and Governance.
Susan Hinchcliffe, Leader of Bradford.
Tim Swift, Leader of Calderdale.
Councillor John Lawson from Kirklees.
Ryan Archer, Director of Economic Services at the Combined Authority.
Angela Taylor, Director of Corporate Commercial Services, Combined Authority.
Dave Pearson, Director of Transport and Property Services at the Combined Authority.
Liz Hunter, Interim Director of Policy and Development at the Combined Authority.
Alan Rees, Director of Strategy, Communications and Policing at the Combined Authority.
Councillor Matthew Robinson from Leeds City Council.
Councillor Rebecca Paulson, Leader of the Conservatives on Bradford Council.
Good morning, Shabir Pando, Leader of Kirklees Council.
Good morning, James Lewis, Leader of Leeds City Council.
Dominic Martin, Governance Services Officer at the Combined Authority.
Thank you, super. Dominic, any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Jeffrey, Sir Roger Marsh, both of the substitutes, and from Councillor Groves.
I think we're also currently waiting for Councillor Waller. Is that correct? He may be on his way, or they may be on their way. Thank you. Before we start officially, I just want to say I spent the last 2 days this week at the Global Investment Summit, and it was so brilliant to be able to be a champion for our region, and what we've all achieved in the last 6 months with devolution is really incredible. And so many investors, big global companies, were interested in us. And it was great. We made some great contacts. And if I can just put on record, my thanks to the Trade and Investment team who supported Sir Roger Marsh and I in that on that trip and all the meetings that we made. It was just really positive, and I'm so proud of all that we've achieved, even in the last 6 months. So I just wanted to put that on record. Okay, so item 2, declarations of interest. Any members have any interest that they wish to declare in any item on the agenda? No, thank you so much. And the exclusion of press and the public, item 3. Officers have identified item 10, appendix 1, contains exempt information. Are we all happy to agree the recommendation that the information is exempt? That's the BSIP appendices, appendix, great. So when we come to item 10 on the agenda, if any member wishes to discuss the content of appendix 1, please advise me, and I'll ask the press and public to leave the room at that point. I think there's only a couple of people that might have to leave, so it shouldn't take us too long. So we're happy to agree that? Yes, thank you. Okay, item 4, minutes of the 9th of September 2021. Are there any comments or questions on these minutes? No, thank you. We're all content to confirm these as an accurate record? Yes, thank you so much. Okay, moving on to item 5, COVID-19. While obviously we've seen a rise in cases, we'll do everything in our power across the whole of the Combined Authority, and I know that my colleagues in the leaders of councils will do the same to keep our communities safe, and those especially hyper exposed to the impact of COVID and its effects. So this report asks members to note the updates on COVID-19, particularly with regard to the delivery of business support and employment and skills as we respond to the end of the furlough scheme and universal credit uplift. So I'll be asking Brian Archer, Director of Economic Services, to take us through this item. So over to you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start with some of the latest COVID statistics which have been published this week. As of yesterday, we've got 503 cases per 100,000 of population in West Yorkshire, which is 15% up. So case rates are increasing, and it is getting close to the November peak, particularly for the 10 to 14-year-old age group. Calderdale has the 9th highest rates in England, and COVID bed occupancy has also increased by up to 14%. So we are starting to see an increase in infection rates, which is starting to impact. In terms of the economy and business support, we are seeing retail sales start to fall. What we're hearing from businesses is that rising energy prices, in particular gas, is disproportionately affecting those energy intensive businesses. And just this morning, the Bank of England were forecasting that inflation may hit as high as 5%. So that's actually putting significant pressure on the business community across West Yorkshire and beyond. And there'll be some pressure to no doubt increase interest rates. In terms of our response to that, there's been some specific issues around skill shortages across all sectors, notwithstanding the driver shortage that's been publicised quite widely. We are looking at repurposing some of the adult education budget to help with that, address that particular issue. Furlough ended in September. At the peak, there were 380,000 people on furlough in West Yorkshire. That's now dropped to well, it finished in September, but at the low point, it was around 40,000. So we are starting to see an increase in referrals coming through Job Centre Plus to the Employment Hub. And the team are obviously working closely with our local authority partners to match people to some of those job opportunities. We're also seeing an increase in new business bank accounts being opened, which is quite timely because we're about to launch our business startup offer to support people considering self-employment as an option, as well as supporting existing businesses. I'll take the rest of the paper as read, but I'm happy to take questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's really timely what you're saying about rising inflation. I had the privilege of sitting next to the Governor of the Bank of England, and this was the question that everybody was asking him about interest rates. But we know, don't we, that families are having to find another £31 a week, given the changes to universal credit and so on. But whilst we may have more disposable income in our pockets, that disposable income is being squeezed by rising energy prices, transport, etc. So really important for us to keep a weather eye on that. Are there any comments? Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and really welcome, obviously, all the support the combined authority has given businesses throughout this really difficult time for people. And I think all the businesses who've had connection with combined authority were really, encouraged by their support. Just looking through the paper and thinking about the way ahead, as you mentioned yourselves, there's communities in this region have been very badly hit, obviously by the universal credit coming down, for example. And obviously we've got some good targets in there about making sure we support people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds, women and people with disabilities. But I'd also like to make sure we think about that in terms of place-based initiatives as well. Some places in the region have been more badly hit than others in terms of universal credit, and anything we do really should be mindful of that, I think, with the funding, albeit meagre funding we've got, because obviously we're waiting to see what happens with government next week in the spending review. But for the money that we have, let's make sure we use it to inclusive growth, as you always say, Mayor.
Thank you. That's a point really well raised. Thank you. Councillor Pandor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few things. Firstly, I welcome the report, but there's a few things I just need to highlight. As the leaders, I'm sure other leaders will share my concerns. Firstly, end of furlough and ending of universal credit will have a big impact on our communities, and it's something that we need to just think about, especially as we go through the recovery. It will be quite a challenging time, especially on the back of energy prices increasing, and the forecast is that it'll probably take at least a year to actually normalise, and what that new normal will be, I dread to fear. Also, cost of living is on the increase, and Brian just mentioned that the forecast is that inflation could go up to 5%, which then conversely impacts on higher interest rates. And we all know there was a massive hike in property prices. A lot of people have taken out big mortgages, so we just need to keep an eye on that in terms of what that means. Also, the other thing is, in terms of, we'll be setting our budget in February, and it's challenging time because although the government said that the 1% precept on NHS will solve the problem, yesterday at the LGA and on a cross-party basis, we showed grave concern that there's another potential time bomb in terms of a crisis in adult social care. As we come out of the pandemic, the forecasts are that the figures are going high. So what I will do, and I'm sure the leaders will share this, do whatever we can to make sure that the government's booster program is fully supported. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to go into a situation where we actually go into further lockdowns, because I don't think that's good for anybody. But we have to make sure that we control it at a local level. So what we will do is we will do everything we can at a local level to support government in terms of making sure that we don't go into any further lockdowns. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the 10 to 14-year-olds are fully vaccinated, because unless we vaccinate everyone and unless we actually get the boosters rolled out fully, the future may look quite bleak. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much, and certainly making that that connection between health and the health of our economy is really important. The booster system, the booster program is, you have to wait, I think, 6 months. I think the government are looking at that again. But certainly, I want to put on record my thanks to council leaders for really rolling out vaccination program, but also hopefully then the booster program as well. Just regarding what we can do, if it's helpful to just flag the funding for skills, because we know that what's going to be helpful when it comes to unemployment is to increase our skills program. I seem to be fading in and out here for some reason. I'm not quite sure whether I should turn it off. Do you want to just double check what's going on? We want to make sure everybody can hear me properly, which is good. So it might be worth noting that Sir Roger Marsh and I held a roundtable about HGV drivers and bus drivers and the challenges there. So if there are any solutions or things, that interventions you think we've not looked at that might be of value to you in your communities, please do raise them with me. Also, just lastly, my last point about the mayoral precept, you will have seen that I've taken the decision that it's not the right time for the mayoral precept this year. Obviously, we will take a weather eye in subsequent years, but for now, that would just add to the outgoings of incomes and family incomes that are really stretched. So if I could take Councillor Lawson's point.
Thank you, Matt. Just a couple of points really around about low-income families and about the challenges that they're seeing in our area right now. It's well documented that there's an expected permanent scarring of the economy, and that low-income families are the least well set, the least well prepared to take advantage of any recovery, any economic recovery that happens. So one thing I'd like us to do is just keep an eye on what we're doing in respect with low-income families. I've been informed that we do actually weight a lot of our research and along those lines and our activity along those lines. I would like to point out though that as we look at recovery, let's have a look at some firefighting studies that we may look at. One was a study that came through the British Medical Journal not so long ago, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, about childhood nutritional anemia. And that has been reported in studies from people treating childhood illnesses like leukemia and other blood-related illnesses, which sets them on the back foot. It sets them right at the back. It's expected to improve as lockdown lifts, but if lockdown doesn't lift, we have a lot of children here who are going to suffer disproportionately. So I think I'd like to have us look at those kind of deep-seated inequalities from children, especially on the low income families and children's side. So let's just keep an eye on that. Let's try and knit what's happening on the macro level with a micro level. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we know that 1/3 of all children in West Yorkshire live in poverty, and there is that health inequality that we must address, and children should be a priority. So thank you for raising that point. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Firstly, delighted on your decision on the mayoral precept. I think it's an excellent decision, particularly at a time when household budgets are stretched. I hope other authorities consider that position too. It's a question for Brian on council tax support. Many authorities will have received council tax support. I think Leeds got support to the tune of about £7 million so that people did not have to pay council tax through COVID. Is it possible that that could be included in future COVID reports? And if you have any information on that, could you share it? Secondly, a question about the business support that's in there. There's a lot of support going for digital resiliency vouchers, cybersecurity schemes, and others. How are we tracking that, working with Help to Grow and businesses that are accessing Help to Grow grants, and where we can make sure that they are using it to best effect and that it's making sure we have a resilient economy, particularly in our SME sector?
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, I mean, if I may come back on the council tax support, obviously we should be able to obtain that data through our local authority colleagues. And with regards to the earlier point about the ending of the universal credit uplift, the government announced a £500 million household support fund to plug that gap. We should be able to obtain the data in terms of council tax relief for those poorer families affected by the pandemic through our local authority colleagues. On your second point, with regards to the Help to Grow scheme and other business support programs, part of the business support offer within the combined authority is a hub and spoke model where we match up the needs of business to a whole broad portfolio of business support services that are available, which includes Help to Grow, rebiz, digital resilience vouchers and such like. One of the challenges for our small businesses is finding the support they need, because there's a maze of organisations and agencies out there offering business support. And one of the areas where we can add the most value is to improve that connectivity between the supply side and the businesses. So we would always link businesses into complementary programmes like Help to Grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swift, then Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thank you. Two or thrry quick points. I think so I agree this isn't the right time to have the mayoral precept, but I think it's worth recognising that local authorities will be in a very different position with regard to council tax increases, both in terms of the need to cover their costs. But I do particularly regret that it's quite explicit in the government's announcement on NHS and social care funding that they are assuming that social care precept will continue to be part of how social care is paid for. And I think that's regrettable. I think social care requires a separate and appropriate national funding agreement, but it looks as if, again, that's something we're going to continue to wait for. Brian mentioned in his introduction the case rates in Calderdale, which are very and disturbingly high and have been high for several months now, actually. And that is, of course, experience of of all authorities, although we currently have the highest rate, and people will probably be aware that we've recently issued advice to schools, and it can only be advice to schools, that they should look more carefully about the rules around social distancing and encouraging parents to keep children off when there's cases in the family, which is not what's within the government guidance. And again, I do think that the current rules around schools have encouraged a spread, and that is quite damaging and difficult. And personally, I would prefer to see some stronger government messaging and requirements on some of the lower scale interventions now in terms of mask wearing and social distancing, rather than risk the need for tougher measures later into the year, which is where I fear we're heading if we don't see some action. As it stands, I think we can only continue to emphasise locally the importance of people continuing to take sensible measures to try and limit the spread, because it is having, apart from the direct health risks, which I'll come on to in a moment, it is actually having an impact on on services and on businesses as well, because of the the numbers of staff absences that are being caused either by people themselves suffering from COVID or needing to provide care for their children and having a knock-on effect. And I think even in terms of the importance of children getting as much education as possible, the current levels in schools, particularly that we're seeing in some schools, some of our schools in Calderdale, are actually quite as disruptive as they would be if there was a more sensible approach to to the requirements about children staying off and testing. That sort of overlaps the other points. Just want to emphasise, just people know I chair the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership, and I do just want to emphasise, that this situation is already creating real serious challenges for the NHS, and it's not that it's not that I think there's been some suggestions that the NHS will face a crisis if cases continue to rise. The NHS is facing a crisis now, and that is having an impact on the ability to treat people with other conditions and to recover. And when you've got, for example, 10% of beds or more in a hospital taken up by people with COVID cases, and that has a knock-on effect on overall capacity because of the need to retain distancing, that's going to add to the further delays in recovering from other things as well. So the situation and the pressures on the NHS are extremely serious, and we shouldn't underestimate the impact they're going to have. The final point I wanted to make was just, the colleagues have spoken well about the concerns about low-income families and the impact of the reduction of universal credit. It's just worth emphasising as well that is not just a problem for, it's a big problem for the families affected, but that again, it also has a knock-on effect on some of the businesses in some of our poorer communities, because generally people who are on benefits and lower income spend more of their money locally and in the local economy, and taking that money out again, particularly in the areas like North Halifax, in our case, areas of Bradford and so on, where you have high levels of deprivation, it adds to the challenges for those businesses as well. Thank you.
Some really well-made points there, if I may say. The problem is, it seems to me that it feels like the public think it's over. I think we need to be making the case more clearly that we are potentially heading for a crisis in our hospitals. So any data that you can share with us would be very helpful. Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thank you, Mayor. And absolutely, as you say, really share the concerns of my colleague here in Calderdale, and particularly around the adult social care funding as well. Actually, it's absolutely right for a government to suddenly say, council tax needs to have 3% precept on it to pay for adult social care, shows me that there is actually no plan at all for adult social care. In spite of the fact they came out with a plan, that was no plan. So that is a concern for us. I was just wanting to ask really Councillor Robinson about, just to clarify what he needs about the government money that came during COVID for reduction in council tax, because that's obviously finished now, is that? So the money that's come, that 500 million that's come out, of which I think Leeds has got 7, we've got 5.7. That's just for food and fuel. That's not for council tax. So we're trying to get vouchers and payment for low-income families out there as quickly as possible to people. But it was a different parameters to what was provided during COVID. I'd love them to provide more of that if they could, but that's not what it's there for, I don't think. I may be wrong. We're going to understand your question.
Happy to answer. In the same way that in the report, the local authority grants are recorded, I felt it would be useful to record the grants that were available for council tax support as well. And the other grants, it's difficult to help track this and have the conversation if we're not understanding all the grants that are available in there and what they're available for. So I think, sorry?
Those will be in Leeds Council as opposed to combined authority. So I'm sure Councillor Lewis will have those.
And so will the local authority grants that are in there. They're written in the report, they're recorded in the report, that the local authority grants, I don't see why the council tax support that was available couldn't be recorded. If we want a conversation about the holistic and where we need to target support to the communities that need it most and the people that need it most, as Councillor Swift and yourself have said and others around this table, I think we need to understand the holistic picture as well as the micro picture on this.
Councillor Paulson.
Thank you. I just wanted to go what you were saying earlier about the skills. Obviously, we want to upskill people across the whole of West Yorkshire. We mentioned the adult education budget and using that to fill skills gaps we've got. Is the capacity there to actually deliver that training and support? It's all right us saying, well, here's a budget and we need some skills, but is there actual capacity there? And how are we working with training providers to actually make sure we get the skills to the right people that need it?
Brian.
Yes, I can assure Councillor Poulson the capacity and capability is there within the supply sector. We've got some outstanding colleges across West Yorkshire, some great local authority provision and some really strong private training providers. The total devolved adult education budget is 65 million. Over the last 10 years, the adult education budget has been cut by over 50%. There is plenty of capacity on the supply side to deliver the skills and training that we need for West Yorkshire. What we need is additional resource and more funding to meet, to meet the demand. But the supply side is really strong, and we're fortunate in West Yorkshire that we've got some really, really good colleges doing some fantastic work across the patch.
And having recently met all the vice chancellors and chancellors of the further education colleges, they are very, very keen to work with us and deliver excellent training. And in fact, there's lots of oversubscription for courses, and the quality is second to none. So I'm really pleased with what we're hoping to deliver, because skills are the original levelling up, aren't they? We give people the skills to get the jobs and to fulfil their potential. That's what we should be doing. Okie doke. Any further thoughts on this item? No? Okay. Are we all happy to note the updates with regard to the delivery of business support and employment and skills in response to COVID? All happy? Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to item 6. Regarding the climate and environment plan. I'll just make some opening remarks on this because it's profoundly important for our region. As the UK prepares to host the UN's COP26 summit, this is a crucial moment. We must act now to stop the devastating impact that the climate and environment emergency will have on all our lives, which is why I'm also pleased that we will be going to COP26 in Glasgow, myself and Ben, to make the case around West Yorkshire. Getting more people to use public transport is part of the solution to the climate emergency. That's one of the reasons why I'm delighted to be able to announce our free bus Sunday on the 31st of October to encourage people in our area to take the bus to be greener. It's also an opportunity to raise awareness of COP26 and how buses are vital to our strategy to net zero. Our region has first-hand experience of the climate emergency. Flooding events such as those on Boxing Day 2015 traumatised communities across West Yorkshire. What we once regarded as a once-in-a-generation event is now a regular occurrence. If we are to protect ourselves and our communities, we need to tackle the root cause. As Mayor of West Yorkshire, I am fully committed to leading our response to the climate emergency. The West Yorkshire Climate and Environment Plan will deliver on that commitment and ensure we create a region where everyone in all communities can really feel the benefits of a net zero carbon economy by 2038 at the latest. This week, the government launched the UK's net zero strategy. Within it, many initiatives to be welcomed, including more support for electric vehicles, grants to replace old gas boilers with zero emission heat pumps. But this strategy does not tackle the scale of the emergency we face and ensure all people benefit from a clean, green and decarbonised society. We can't accept these limitations. If we are to have our fair and just recovery from COVID, we must be bolder. Here in West Yorkshire, we're committed to going further and faster to decarbonise our economy, regenerate our communities and ensure the move to net zero is fair, just and lasting. And we urge government to work with us and other regions to support our ambitious plans to deliver change. We need to ensure any financial incentives and support offered to people are not just for the already wealthy. They have to be inclusive. To begin work on our plan, we need to secure £85 million, and I'm looking forward to working with government, business, investors and partners to release that money as soon as possible. Getting more people to use public transport is part of the solution. And I would encourage everyone around this table to please do pop on a bus Sunday the 31st to encourage people in the region to take the bus to be greener. And we're going to hopefully raise awareness at next month's COP26 in Glasgow, and I'm really looking forward to attending. So today I am seeking your endorsement to bring forward a climate and environment fund to secure the £85 million funding needed for the actions for the combined authority. And the combined authority will work with partner local authorities to design the delivery mechanisms for this fund. I'd also like approvals to identify potential funding sources for the fund, including the single investment fund. Decisions will be taken, obviously, after the comprehensive spending review, which will indicate whether and when there is likely to be further national funding available to support this work. So if I may hand over to Councillor Swift as Chair of the Climate, Energy and Environment Committee for any additional comments. Councillor Swift, thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, Chair. I think you given made a very comprehensive case for the work that's set out in this plan and the importance of it. I'm pleased to say that in broad terms this was strongly supported by the Climate Committee. I'm sorry that I was personally unable to attend that, and would like to thank Mark Roberts, the Deputy Chair, for chairing that meeting and steering the discussions through so well. This plan effectively brings together two strands of work: the work that the combined authority was already doing on carbon reduction pathways, and your own mayoral pledge on making the priority of climate change. And hopefully it merges those two together very well and sets out a way forward on that. And perhaps just pick up one or two things that were specifically highlighted from the discussion at the committee. As people who read the plan carefully will see it in terms of future pathways to get to net zero. The emission pathways work talks about 3 potential plans. I think what the committee wanted to emphasise is that it's important to recognise that the early actions that are set out in this are all consistent with each part of those 3 different pathways, and don't sort of prejudge any of the decisions that we might need to take going forward. And the committee is keen to see at future meetings sort of the timescale for reviewing those pathways and when we'll be in a position to take firmer decisions about which of those we follow. And there's a lot of support for the committee playing a continuing role in measuring and monitoring the actions that we're taking on the plan. I'm aware there was issues raised at the committee about the importance of making sure that we're more robust in how we measure the carbon impact, particularly of existing road schemes within there, and that's a piece of work that was started some time ago and that is still continuing. And it's certainly something that the committee is very keen to take a role on reviewing as soon as that's completed. I don't know whether Alan wants to say a little bit more about some of the complexities of that work and why it's taking so much time. It is really important to get it right. I think it's important to recognise, I think we're all aware of the dangers that legacy road schemes may have been designed in the past too much in the light of simply congestion and traffic issues and not enough about carbon. But it also needs to recognise that also in many cases there are choices to be made about how those road schemes are managed, how additional road capacity is used, which can be done in a more carbon-friendly way. So it's not always as straightforward as whether a scheme goes ahead or not. It's also about how the management of that scheme, when it's completed, might work as well. But perhaps I can hand over to Alan for that one.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you. I can do, although Councillor Swift has said most of it. So yeah, we agreed some time ago that we would kick off a piece of work to do really two things. One was to develop better technical guidance for people who are developing schemes so that in the future we can be more, we have a more robust analysis of the likely carbon impact of schemes that are being brought forward, which then enables decision makers to have better sight of the potential carbon impact and then what they might do in response with regard to mitigating any excess impacts, or alternatively being able to record any potential carbon reduction. The second piece of work that it does is the assessment of schemes that are already in the pipeline. This is a very complex piece of work that has not been done elsewhere. So it's new, which is partly why it's taking so long. There is complex data to analyze, and it is by no means straightforward as if you do a road scheme, it increases carbon. It's far more complex than that. So for instance, if you widen a road in order to improve bus priority or make cycling and walking safer, then that can result in modal shift, which in turn results in carbon reduction. So it's quite a complex piece of work. At the point at which the reports are ready, then the intention will be to publish them, and then decisions can be taken about what we might do in response.
Thank you, Alan. If I can just also alert the members of the board to the fact that we have a member of the public from Friends of the Earth who has a leaflet on this subject that is at the end by the door if you would like to take a copy on your way out. Councillor Poulsen.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a few points. It's clearly a lot easier on the home side for us to be building homes now that are net zero, with all the new technology we have with heat pumps, etc., rather than the retrofit. I know how difficult, particularly in my own ward, retrofitting some old housing is. It is incredibly difficult, and some of it cannot be done, unfortunately, with current technology. How are we working with private developers at the moment across West Yorkshire to encourage them to actually do the right thing now and not wait for legislation to come in about, no gas boilers, having heat pumps, etc. in place now, because the sooner they crack on with that, the better. And then we really need to, I think the retrofit is going to be a huge issue as well on some of our older housing stock across the district. We're going to need to do an awful lot more on that. And then just one point I was a little bit when I read the report on page 34 under the highway demand management section, looking at reducing parking supply. Yeah, I'm a little nervous about that because in a lot of places, parking supply, maybe whether we're talking public car parks, I don't know, it's a bit vague, and the impact that will have. For instance, some communities, if they're having electric vehicles, would need to charge them in a public parking location. They cannot charge them at home due to the type of housing they have. So reducing car parking and then knock-on effect, things like tourism. So I think that point there needs to be explored a little bit more. That is just a little bit concerning. Just get rid of parking and it'll get rid of cars. Well, it's not that simplistic, and we do need to encourage people to get electric cars and make sure the infrastructure is in place for them.
Thank you. Regarding the private developers, that's why I made my commitment to 5,000 affordable sustainable homes, because we need to work in partnership with the builders. But also, I think it's not either or. It's not suggesting that we just forget social housing, because actually it's a warm home is cheaper for people, and I would say that that's a priority for me, to make sure that those people who live in the 300,000 social housing homes that we have, they also get a chance to have a warmer home that has cleaner and greener energy. And I was really pleased to see a project in Kirklees that was retrofitting homes. And whilst it is currently quite expensive in comparison to building from new. What we can do is we can learn from this pilot to make it cheaper and have economies of scale to be able to roll it out across the whole of West Yorkshire. I'd like to bring in Councillor Pandor, and then I'll bring in Liz to answer the parking.
Thank you, Mayor. In terms of the recent announcements by government regarding giving households £5,000 to improve their energy efficiency, try and meet the government target of reducing carbon emissions, it's a step in the right direction, but I think the detail is lacking in substance. And one of the things that I think needs exploring is how council housing stock, because a lot of local authorities still retain the housing or still have an arm's length arrangement or some kind of arrangement where they can actually have a direct impact. And one of the things that you need to look at, or we need to look at, is how that money can be invested in council homes, social housing, because arguably, anecdotally, that's actually going to kickstart the market, because the money, if you look at it as seed money to actually develop a future plan in terms of how we can actually develop a robust and sustainable market, because you actually look at volumes, it gets the price down. So again, there's a lot of detail that's lacking. In terms of the broader agenda around climate emergency, again, we have in this combined authority set a target of 2038, and local authorities have also done the same thing across West Yorkshire and beyond. And I think one of the things that COP26 will do is, I'm really pleased that you're going, Tracy, with Ben. The LGA is going to be represented as well by the LGA leadership. And local authorities, mayoral combined authorities, will be the driving force to actually deliver. Because we've all been talking about climate emergency for many, many years, you know, certainly since I was a lad. And now I'm getting a bit older, and my kids are now talking about it. And if people really got it, they would have actually made the changes by now. You know, we all get it. It's like obesity. We all know it's not good for you, but you know, how do you crack that nut? And I think that at a local authority level, at combined authority level, we can really initiate them changes, because unless you change the hearts and minds of people, you're not going to do it. So great, the government needs to have a very clear strategy, but then it needs to allow combined authorities, local authorities to get on with the job, because we know our communities, we know where the pinch points are, we know where the issues are, and we know where we can make a difference. So I'm really pleased, Mayor, that you're going and you'll be flying the flag for West Yorkshire, and we'll also be doing the same at the LGA level. And we need to make sure that we help and support government to make sure that we tackle this crisis. Thanks.
Thank you, really great points. And Liz, regarding parking, then Councillor Lawson, then Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, parking is a difficult and I know often sensitive subject. I think what we're saying in the paper is that we should consider measures to look at parking, not least because parking spaces, as I think the report suggests, can sometimes be better used for other things. We've seen some really good examples of where meanwhile car parking has been turned into development, but I completely recognise that people still want to travel, and so it's how you then provide people with the alternatives. And so that's why some of the other measures in the paper also talk about public transport, cycling and walking, so there are alternatives for people. That's not always possible, I also understand that, and so this is why it's looking at it in the round. This is not suggesting that we're suddenly going to take a one-size-fits-all approach. This is about looking at parking supply and considering the different measures in partnership with the councils whose policy this is. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. And if I have my way and everybody's on the bus, we won't need any parking spaces at all. I jest. But it's certainly the cost of parking in Leeds has motivated me to use the park and ride. So it's a lot of nudge as well to try and get people to use public transport. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you. Can I start by saying this is a really welcome report. We really kind of sign up to a lot of things that are in here. I'd also like to say congratulations on the free bus initiative. Liberal Democrats were supporting something slightly different, but it's quite frankly, potato. It's something to actually raise awareness, and that's welcome. I would be interested in seeing what kind of results you get, and see if we can pull out some information on that kind of event. Maybe we can repeat it a few times. I echo Councillor Pandor's comments, and I was glad to see it in the visuals in here about behaviours, because quite frankly, that's a whole other report all by itself, and that's kind of the value of this, to me anyway. That's the value of this forum, is that what was missing on the visuals was that sense of complexity. So I was really pleased to hear people around the room talking about that, and it brings the report to life. There's just one other thing that I'd probably mention, otherwise we're probably going to run over our allotted hour and a half if I mention everything that we're going to do today. But I would question about our own works, our own engineering works that we carry out, and biodiversity net gain. Local authorities are under an onus to provide biodiversity net gain in their housing planning, the residential planning, but there's not much talk at the moment about net gain in engineering works and highways and other civil engineering. I think those conversations are going on in the background in Parliament, but is it something that we are discussing, even if it's at the very beginning stages? Thank you.
Before I bring in Councillor Swift, I wonder if either Liz or Alan would like to respond to that.
Thank you. It's a really good point, and I think there are already elements of schemes where promoters are looking at that. But I think it's definitely one we should have further discussions on and see what more we can do. So I'm happy to take that away, Chair, if you're in agreement, and have another look at what we can do around that moving forward.
Thank you for that suggestion. Great. Councillor Swift.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for the comments. Yeah, on that last one first, I was also going to mention I think there were some elements of that in the blue-green infrastructure paper that was agreed a while ago, but I think there's, I think it's fair to say there's still quite a bit of work to be done on getting from those as broad principles to actually building them into the day-to-day design work that's done on highway schemes. And it's not just about the big schemes, it's local maintenance schemes and things like that. I think it's only fairly recently in many councils that we've changed the culture away from highways engineers seeing street trees simply as a problem that cause routes to disrupt the pavements, and getting street planting to be seen as an important part of biodiversity and tree planting schemes and so on. I just emphasise the points that were made really about home insulation. I think yes, I agree with Councillor Paulson that the more we can do to get new homes built to the highest possible standards, the better, because obviously that is better than the retrofitting. And I think that is hinted at, but we could probably do more on that in the Better Homes Yorkshire Hub proposals within the scheme, that there are real opportunities to share best practice. And I think as we're hoping will happen with the government's pilot scheme around heat pumps as well, hopefully the more that builders develop and build these in, then you lead to further innovation and hopefully a reduction in the costs of some of these things as well, which I guess is the importance of the heat pump scheme. But I do think the big push still has to be how we get the investment that's needed into heat insulation, because whatever the future is for homes heating, whether it's hydrogen replacing gas, or it's heat pumps or whatever, we can still economize the best by making sure that every house is as efficient as possible. And doing that work now doesn't prejudge decisions for the future about heating options. And actually also, we talked on the previous item about some of the cost of living pressures people face as well, I think is a real win-win, both in terms of the environmental agenda and in terms of those economic concerns as well. I could say quite a lot about parking, like most council leaders, having the scars from putting up parking charges and taking parking spaces out. But perhaps that's one for another day. But I think I think one of the things, again, where we that we need to do as this develops is actually firm up some of the evidence about what the impacts of parking charges and changing to parking really are. Because although we'll all have sat in debates where we've been told by traders that we're ruining our town centres by putting up parking charges by 10p an hour, the actual evidence about the impact of charges is very, very weak. It's a very under-researched area. Certainly in terms of cities, the evidence is that the most prosperous cities tend to have the highest parking charges, which suggests that parking charges follow demand rather than having much to do with, with actually the economic impact of parking as such. That doesn't necessarily follow that applies for towns, though, and the bit of work that has been done looks on towns finds a much more mixed picture. But overall, I think it's an area where there will be some tough decisions to be taken on parking going ahead as part of modal shift, but also there is still a problem that there is actually limited evidence about what really works in a British context.
That's something potentially we could take away and have a look at. Councillor Robinson and then Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of comments and then a couple of questions, if that's okay. I agree with everybody who said that this is the biggest issue of our time, and I welcome this report coming forward. I think the mentions of digital infrastructure are really, really positive. There's opportunity to go further and faster, I think, on this. The pension fund divestment, and I think is a point that's being well made, and I'm pleased to see that is coming forward. I think the next challenge there is not just divestment, but the investment and where that pension fund is going and how we can start to align some of that. And I share the comments made by Councillor Pilson and Councillor Swift on the planning system. And I would welcome some sort of mayoral gold standard where there are private developers who are bringing forward schemes and we say, actually, this is what we want to see in West Yorkshire. This is a sort of proactive initiative because, as was made with the last item, many people have stretched themselves to move homes. Inflation goes up. If there is then going to be other measures that are brought in that mean that these people have to borrow even more, particularly first-time buyers, those who are on low incomes, they're just not going to have that headroom. So we want to definitely be encouraging people to build it before we have to then go and retrofit it. In terms of some of the questions, within the report, it talks about EV points at filling stations. The report says that we're going to investigate it, and then the end of the report says that the mayor will use powers to bring it in. Can I be clear, is that going to be something that's used, that's coming forward? We're going to have EV points at filling stations, and that's something that can be announced today. Second question is river cleanliness. This is an issue that I know has come up all across West Yorkshire, particularly looking at Councillor Poulson here. If we think about the River Wharf going from Ilkley through Wetherby, this has been a big issue for residents. Bradford as well. I'm just thinking of the area that's been brought, but as I say, this is something across West Yorkshire. I'd really appreciate if we can build an action point into the plan on river cleanliness and make sure that we are talking about this and how it impacts communities, families in the environment and wildlife. I think it's a point that's missing in the report and I'd welcome it being added in. The final question is sorry, Liz, it's to do with parking. There's a number of mentions about traffic control measures, road space reallocation, reducing parking supply, parking charges based on carbon or height, weight and width. That sounds an awful lot like a Range Rover charge that could be coming in some areas. What I would add is that there's for many people who are on low incomes, they will have older vehicles. That when charges come in, this does impact them. They don't have the financial ability to be able to go and make a choice to go hybrid and electric at this stage. And a charge will affect them, particularly those who are living in rural areas or on low income. So just understanding that and that being factored into the mix when we think about what comes forward with parking and road reallocation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and just to confirm, Ilkley is in the Bradford district, as well as Councillor Paulson looks after it. I looked after it as well, of course. So we've done quite a lot of work on, obviously, water quality on the River Wharf. So something that we have done, we're very focused on at the moment. I just wanted to go back to Councillor Paulson's point about housing, actually, and how we encourage developers to build new in the right way. And I think we can't shy away from the fact, and I don't know what the numbers are, but it's going to cost more for a developer to build something with proper heat source pumps in it and proper insulation than they would generally now. And I think therefore, if we've got low marginal viability in some parts of the region on house building, they'll need extra money from government to do that. So we've had that announcement from government about retrofitting. I mean, perhaps next week we'll see something on supporting incentives for builders to build properly in the first place. I think it's a very good point, but I imagine that if they were here, that's what they would say, that actually they're building with low viability at the moment because the economy is not doing very well. And therefore, how are they going to build in extra costs without the public sector support? And that is such a magnitude in terms of the amount of investment that is going to have to come from government. So with COP26, etc., and spending review next week, I expect if the government is serious on this, I expect some major investment coming out of government that hopefully will be devolved so we can actually get to the people who need it most quickly. But I would expect that, as Councillor Paulson said, to be a major plank of that if we're really serious about houses being fit for the future.
Absolutely. And what we don't want is the builders to build houses that are more expensive and pass the cost on to the consumer or the purchaser. And we end up with a two-track system. Just to answer your point, Councillor Robinson, on EV, I do have those powers, obviously looking into it. I would love us to follow suit with Essex that have a fully EV charging station. I think that would be quite totemic. So it's something that I'm looking into, but it's part of the plan of thinking. So thank you for raising that. Any more thoughts on this document? If we can move on. Thank you so much. Are we all happy to agree and identify the potential sources for funding as well? That's part of it. Thank you. Great stuff. Lovely. So moving on to item 7. Capital spending and project approvals. This provides details of schemes recommended to the CA for progression through the assurance process. Melanie's not here, so if I could invite Craig Taylor, Head of Portfolio Management and Appraisal, to outline excuse me, the proposals for capital spending and approvals under the new thematic committee structure and each of the 4 schemes for consideration. So over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the capital approvals project is it's actually got 3 projects for approval today, and then it reports on approvals that have been made by the managing director through his delegation through the assurance framework. So would you like me to go through each of the projects one at a time so you can discuss each project one at a time, or shall I do all 3 at the same time?
All 3, I think, is fine, as we're slightly short of time.
Okay, so the first one is the Green Jobs Task Force, and we're asking for £500,000 worth of money from the Single Investment Fund, and that is really because at the moment the scale, reach and provision and future demand of green skills is not really known. So this scheme is to so we can research that and see what's currently available and develop a plan of actions going forward. And that is pretty much simply what that one is all around. The second one is the Creative New Deal. This will support development and delivery of activity support to support cultural and creative industries across West Yorkshire, which obviously will impact on the Mayor's pledge of the Creative New Deal, but also is a key objective of the economic recovery plan. So again, we're asking for £500,000 of money here, again from the Single Investment Fund. There's 2 strands. One is around boosting capacity for the Creative New Deal, and that includes continuation of Beyond Bronte's programme. And the strand 2 is to progress the concept of a Town of Culture Award for West Yorkshire. Also, I think it's probably just worth mentioning that we'll also explore the use of Langthwaite Enterprise Zone for creative industry purposes. And then the third one, lastly, in May 2020, the DfT announced £250 million worth of Emergency Active Travel Fund. We've been through 2 tranches of that, and West Yorkshire up to date have got 12.566 million. This is the 3rd tranche that we've just bid for. We're expecting to get around, well, we've got 12.361 million here. It's quite definitive figure, and that's what we bid for, and that's what we're hoping for. These are very much to provide delivery of permanent schemes, because the other two tranches are more around temporary schemes during the COVID epidemic. So these are more to make them more permanent. Appendix 4 of the paper lists the schemes that we hope to fund. So we're asking for approval of the 12.361, but also we're asking for delegated approval down to the managing director, because if that approval changes, we would like the managing director to approve that. Also, we'd like the lead scheme, which is quite a big scheme. It's about a £5 million scheme, to go further through the assurance process. So we'd like to delegate the approval of that business case to the managing director as well. And that's the 3 schemes.
Thank you. Have we got any comments or thoughts on those schemes? Councillor Paulson.
Yeah, just a specific one I was a bit unsure of. On the nighttime czar role, which is under the Creative New Deal section, the economy research part of it, what exactly is this role? Are they going out to support the economic recovery of businesses in the nighttime economy, or is it a public safety work looking at the safety of women and girls in the nighttime? It's not very clear in the report exactly what that role is for. So I'd like some clarity if possible, please.
Thank you, Councillor Paulson. Liz.
Thank you. It's a good question, and part of the work is to make sure we define something which has the right impact. I think in terms of the nighttime czar, given the prominence and importance of women and girls' safety, we're thinking of it through that lens. So it's something that we'll be looking at probably more so through the pledge on women and girls' safety, rather than through the kind of culture lens. So we've kind of had a rethink about the funding around the culture pledge, and think that the nighttime czar probably sits a bit more closely with women and girls' safety, if that helps give more clarity.
Of course.
So will this bit be moving from the creative funding more into a policing safety project funding, or is it going to stay in the creative one?
So I think in terms of, I think there's a couple of things there. One, there's many linkages between the pledges. So we're really keen that even where we have sub pledges, that they're not necessarily just seen under one, but they might have implications across. I think it will have a greater focus around women and girls' safety, which obviously has an impact on people going out in the nighttime economy, etc. But when we bring this back, you probably see it more under the women and girls' safety pledge in future, is where we're thinking. And yeah, we're still doing the work around what that looks like.
And just to add that the committee has just been set up, so this will be an opportunity to investigate further the pledges, to dig deeper, and whether, for example, the Town of Culture Award is the same as the City of Culture Award, or is that something different that is more community-based? All of these questions will be discussed using the expertise and the many years of experience of the Culture Committee members. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you. Just a brief question, really, is that all that considered, Councillor Paulson's comments there, all that considered, the funding ask seems to be the same. Is that significant, or am I missing the point here, and that it's funded from this and will dip into other funds and other areas? Thank you.
Liz.
Thank you. Often when we're in the early stages of development, we've been thinking about how to make best use of the funding. There is, as we say in the paper, although I'm trying to find exactly where it is, about a kind of theatre without walls, which is also something we want to investigate. So quite how we will use the funding to make sure we make the most of it across all these different pledges. Because this is about development work and supporting, we think we'll be able to do both, but it's early stage money, so we're likely to come back therefore once we've had a better idea of what we're going to do with funding to deliver.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mayor. A question for Craig, if that's okay, related to the green skills, the skills, green jobs task force and gateway paper, if I can spit it out. On page 96, it says how some of the £500,000 are going to be spent, and at least 3/5 of it appear to be on 3 jobs, as opposed to delivering frontline service skills training. I just wondered, is that to leverage in further funding, or how's that arrangement set up? Sorry, might be back to you, Liz.
Liz.
Thank you. Yes. So what we're trying to do is increase the capacity within the team to do exactly what you've just been talking about. So we have already set up the task force. We're hoping for that to meet in the next couple of months. We've got people and businesses pledging jobs, but we need capacity within the team to then to do the next steps of the work around that. So it is very much about it's not kind of, as you say, frontline delivery, but it's establishing now the kind of pipeline and the processes that we want to see, and the relationships with business that will then drive the new jobs coming through, and the relationships that we want to set up between businesses and those coming through the kind of education system, because it's quite clear, hopefully in the papers, that some of the aspiration here is that linkage between kind of young people into skilled jobs. So that's part of what we're trying to do, is how we can set that up to have longevity. So it is about people, it's about capacity within the team to do that, to then leverage in other business opportunities.
Councillor Robinson.
Brief follow-up then. I think that makes sense. That's good, and that's good to know. I think we probably need to be clear in the reporting of where the combined authorities funding is going to create those jobs, because skills is a very complex agenda, as opposed to what a company would be doing anyway, and they sign up to our pledge and it becomes one of those green jobs and the green jobs task force that comes through. I think just tracking that would probably be useful.
But yes, absolutely. We wouldn't be spending the money without knowing we're going to get the outcomes that we want. So absolutely, good point, well made. Right, moving on, if everyone is happy. The delegation, just double checking where we have to approve this, Ben. The Climate Emergency Committee.
So this is item 8.
Right, that's going on to item 8. Okay, so we're all happy to approve the next steps for the 3 items that Craig has just taken us through. Good stuff. Excellent. Thank you so much. So moving on to item 8, corporate matters. And the paper asks the CA to approve the appointment of private sector members to fill vacant slots on 3 of its committees, and also to ask the combined authority accept the debt cap of 248 million offered by Her Majesty's Treasury as part of the process to extend our borrowing powers to also include money borrowed for economic purposes, to add to existing powers to borrow for transport and policing purposes. And this comes after a submission discussed with the Finance, Resources and Corporate Committee and made to HM Treasury this summer. The debt cap will cover until the 31st of March 2022, and there'll also be a further process to establish a debt cap for subsequent years. We're also waiting information on the timescale to progress legislation enabling us to borrow for economic purposes. And obviously we're asking members to note the work underway on the 2022-23 budget. So I'm looking to Angela. Oh, there you are. Angela, to talk us through this paper. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've actually covered most of the main points in this. I'm probably happy to take any questions from any members around the table.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Matt. Brief one, Angela. How does the debt cap compare to other combined authorities across the UK?
Thank you. Good question. The debt caps vary quite a lot. Some of the smaller, newer combined authorities have figures less than 100 million, some a little above. Some of the bigger ones are nearer £1 billion, but that I think reflects combined authorities that have been both established for longer and have had funding streams for longer that they've been able to use to build up that borrowing. It is just a one-year position. We did set out more ambition going forward once we understand the funding we've got, how we want to use it. So this takes us through to next March. There is significant headroom between what was in our budget this year for borrowing and what we've put into the cap request. So it shouldn't fetter our decision making around borrowing when we bring that forward.
Thank you, Angela. If everyone is happy, we'd also like to just get your approval for recommendations for appointments as well. Fantastic. Thank you. So moving on, I'm very aware of the time and I want to make sure we have enough time to discuss the BSIP as well. So moving on to the next item agenda, the Transpennine route upgrade. This report updates the authority on the next step in formal processes. Negotiations are underway and I'll ask Dave Pearson, Director of Transport, to advise the meeting on progress regarding the agreement with Network Rail around safeguards. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. As the paper sets out, the Combined Authority is very supportive of the Transpennine route upgrade, but there are some technical matters which we are seeking to resolve with Network Rail, particularly regarding the impact of the work on Huddersfield Bus Station. We've been in negotiations and discussions with Network Rail on an agreement. We are about to finalise that agreement probably in the next day or so. So the recommendations in front of you are to enter into an agreement to obtain the safeguards to ensure that the works do not significantly interfere with the operation of Huddersfield Bus Station and the bus network in Huddersfield. If we can't achieve that agreement, then the Combined Authority would participate in the forthcoming public inquiry about the matter. If we can obtain the agreement, then the Combined Authority will submit a very supportive letter to the inquiry, also identifying that we've resolved the outstanding issues. I'm very confident that we can achieve an agreement in a matter of days. And I know our colleagues in Kirklees are in a very similar position.
Thank you. It's a question I was going to ask how long you think it might take, but a couple of days is good to hear. Any thoughts on Transpennine? Yes. Councillor Waller, thank you.
Thank you. It was really to ask for the latest information on improvements on the Transpennine route in general, because I think with the current situation of such uncertainty on previous commitments, it would be helpful to understand what we can do to ensure that the improvement, which would benefit the whole area, from the York perspective as well as this Combined Authority perspective, what we can all do to make sure that happens.
Well, Councillor Waller, let me tell you how much I've been pressing government for clarity from the integrated rail plan, the Transpennine upgrade, Northern Powerhouse Rail. We're seemingly making the case every single day that we need government to understand that levelling up means a first-class 21st century transport system that includes electrification across the whole of that line. I don't know if anybody else wants to make a comment on that, but we won't know anything until we see the integrated rail plan. And rumour has it that potentially early November. Any further thoughts? No, happy to approve. Great. Let's move on. Thank you so much. And now moving on to item 10, the bus service improvement plan. Also just to mention, there is an exempt, to remind everybody, appendix exempt information. So if you want to discuss that, we can do that at the end of the meeting when press and public will be invited to leave the room. So obviously you'll know that as the Mayor, I've pledged to have a better service on the buses, bring them back under public control, introduce simpler fares, contactless ticketing and greener buses. And this improvement plan is a major step in working towards these commitments and detailing the shared vision for better buses across the region. And honestly, it has got to be the first choice rather than the choice because you don't have a car. Our plan is really bold and incredibly ambitious, but simple in its focus on the passenger. As the Mayor, I see myself as the voice of the passenger, as the champion of the passenger, their needs and their experiences and what they expect when they get on a bus. And it's more than getting a passenger from A to B. It's about unlocking the full social value of buses and ensuring we provide a public service by connecting people to work, education and leisure opportunities. So we want a safe and inclusive bus system that makes sure it's safe for everyone and makes it fully accessible for those with physical disabilities and health and social needs. I need to reimagine how we design and attract passengers to the bus system so it serves more than just the traditional commuter. New services that operate for longer periods of the day, more flexibility, easier to understand, able to deliver initiatives that support women and girls and other vulnerable groups to feel empowered to travel by bus. Better connected communities. I know as the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen, we need better bus services in towns and villages. And we are a really large region with multiple different urban centres. And our bus network needs to connect these different communities. We also need to make sure we extend the hours of the day that buses serve these communities with better frequency and regularity. Decarbonisation and integrated sustainable travel is really important given our climate change commitments and becoming net zero carbon economy by 2038. Bus travel can and must play a major role in achieving this. And when 90% of transport emissions come from cars and vans, we need to do more. Enabling more journeys by bus will be integral to reducing this. Currently, only 1% of all buses operating in West Yorkshire are zero emission. So this must be a priority. We need greener buses, radically improve the roads they run on, the service they offer, so that they're fast, reliable and convenient, better integrated into our multimodal public transport offer. So rail travel, cycling, walking and buses are all interconnected. So I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this ambitious plan. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you. Yes, ambitious and very welcome. There is again another report where there is a lot to admire, and yes, we come into this sort of stage of bus development where we feel something major has to happen to push things forward to get people actually travelling by bus. Now, what I think my comment today would be in the shape of an anecdote. I was approached about a fortnight ago by a resident who said that they were disabled, they have epilepsy, so can't drive. They work, they're a carer, their earliest shift is 6 o'clock in the morning. Their discount card does not work until 9:30. Now, that seems to me a very parlous state of affairs, and it seems something that we should be addressing as we go forward. If you have discussions already in play, I'd be really interested to hear about them. If not, is this not a work stream that we should be taking forward? Thank you.
Thank you. And it's something that I've been concerned about, because if you're someone who works but you have a disability, you are actually not, it's not particularly fair, but it's something we have been discussing. I don't know if Dave, you want to comment further?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the free bus pass scheme for older people and people with disabilities is a national scheme. So essentially, the template for that and the 9:30 cutoff is set as part of the national scheme. The local transport authorities do have discretion to extend that, and it is something which is being looked at in terms of the options available. So it's a point well made, and one made by others in other forums as well. It's something within this plan we're not categorically saying that's how we want to do it. We really need to look at what the options available are in terms of supporting people with disabilities in terms of making their journeys before the 9:30 cut off. It is a little bit of perhaps an oversimplistic system that we've got as a national system, and we just probably need to know what's best for the people that we want to serve.
Councillor Lawson and then Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thank you. So in that vein, it's concerning pretty much everybody around the table. I think that's sort of fairly nailed on. But is this actually in view of the Transport Committee at the moment? Is it a work stream? Are we actually addressing this formally?
Chair, We have a concessionary fare scheme within West Yorkshire. It could be amended to include this. It would be at a cost, and obviously the combined authority would need to look at the cost and benefits of whatever was proposed in that context. It's not something we can directly bid to government for within the bus service improvement plan, because it's actually something that's within the local transport authority's gift. So it is something which we can bring back to the combined authority if members so wishes to do so, but it would probably be in the context of a budget discussion rather than a bus policy discussion, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And Councillor Hinchcliffe, then Councillor Paulson, did you want to speak as well? Yes, apologies. Councillor Hinchcliffe, Councillor Paulson was first. Councillor Paulson, apologies.
We won't fight in Bradford. Yeah, just a few points. Obviously, it's a lot easier if you live in an urban area and you want to get a nice simple route to go bus stop outside your house to go into, say, into Leeds city centre, where there's a frequent service during the day and the evening. That's easy to convert people to move on to it. It's the harder route, the more complex routes. Obviously, Mayor, you're aware of rural areas, having been an MP in a rural area. It's very difficult when buses finish at 7 o'clock and run once every other hour for people to actually run their lives and to actually move on to that. So my plea is that when we're looking at this, we do really we need to work harder for rural communities than for the urban and the city centre communities. The other one that I've noticed sort of recently in my travels is school buses. It seems to me that we put our most vulnerable people, our young children, young people, on the worst buses. If you've ever followed a school bus, they are the oldest buses that can hardly get up the hills half the time, with emissions flowing out of them. And I really think we need to have a specific point on school buses and making sure that we are providing decent service for our young people. It's often their first experience of independent travel. And if you can get people on good quality buses early, and you can then get them through life. But I think there is a safety issue here for children and young people. And then finally, just on the report, just some clarification on the 0.5.1. It mentions a gender neutral bus system. I could a clarification, because I'm not quite sure what that actually means. I didn't think buses had a gender, but maybe I'm misreading what that actually means. If that can clarification, please.
Thank you. Liz, would you like to pick up some of those points?
Yes, thank you. I think what we are looking at through your last comment around gender neutral is trying to understand how different customers use the buses. And there is kind of research out there which suggests that women do more of the childcare responsibilities still. It's changing over time, but there's still more of that by women, who therefore make different trips. And what we're trying to look at is to make sure that all trips for the bus network are not biased towards kind of any one gender, like we are trying to do across all the protected characteristics. We want a bus network that is accessible to all, but we wanted to specifically kind of mention gender in that context to make sure that it's a network that does work for women as well as men, but who might be making different trips around different responsibilities that they have. Does that help?
Thank you. And Councillor Hinchcliffe, Councillor Pandor, and then Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. BSIP is a good opportunity for us to get some money to invest in all the things that we talked about on a regular basis with buses, and trying to get to more places for more people in a less complicated way is the ambition, basically. I'd like to put on record thanks to Councillor Kim Groves, who's done not able to be here unfortunately this morning, but she's led a lot of this work on the bus work that you see in front of us here in terms of the transport strategies and everything, and obviously her insight and knowledge has been really invaluable in getting us this far. So it's quite a short time frame to actually bid into. We've got to bear in mind, of course, that there is an opportunity here, but it does come at a time when operators are cutting some services. And therefore, what I don't want to see is for this to just backfill those services that were originally paid for by the private sector. So I think we have to be watchful of that. And I think the money we spend, ideally, we'd like it to be sustainable in the long term, because this is obviously short-term funding from government. So we could put in some really great new fares, routes, etc. If government then stop that money, then they have to be taken out again. So that is a concern, and therefore when we're choosing routes, I think we have to be mindful of that. Just a few points as well about points that have been made. Absolutely, Councillor from Kirklees, sorry, I forget your name. Lawson, sorry, Councillor Lawson. Agree about the people in society, you were talking about people with disabilities, etc. before 9:30. Just to make the point that it's a national scheme, but it is funded by local council taxpayers. So that's not paid for by the combined authority money that just comes out. It is actually from the transport levy that is taken from local authorities to pay that national scheme. The national scheme is there, but it's not been funded by national government for a very long time. And I would absolutely welcome them paying more, perhaps through something like BSIP, to be able to enable us to do more. But it sounds like that's not available on this occasion. I think on about urban areas versus rural areas, I think we need something everywhere, don't we really? I mean, the urban ideal of bus service you talk about there is not actually experienced by many people in terms of a regular bus service. I live in an urban area, but there's an hourly bus service to Leeds, for example, which takes about an hour and a quarter to get there. So I think there's lots more for us to do in making sure that we service urban areas well as rural areas. And it is, as the Mayor says, about changing it to more public control of routes and more how it interchanges with other modes of transport as well, so that it makes it easier for people to get around. And I think there's a lot of work to do in the next few years to make getting around our region a lot easier. But this is an opportunity to do a bit more, and I really welcome that. And obviously we can take questions about the plan in private afterwards. It's not because it's we're frightened of anything in it, but obviously it's a competitive process, and we're competing against other regions for the same pot. So I want to make sure we put our best foot forward.
Thank you. We've had a lot to discuss today, so time is slightly against us. So if I could just ask for comments to be slightly pithy, that would be very helpful. Councillor Pandor, Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll try and be very, very quick. In terms of rurality versus urban areas, it's a really, really good point. But one of the things that we've seen in the last 18 months is the inequalities we face in our communities. And I would want to get buses everywhere, both in urban and rural areas, because my local authority, we've got big areas of rural areas. At the same time, there's a big conurbation of urban areas. But you need to look at the whole situation in its totality. Poverty, index of multiple deprivation, and the health inequalities, and based on that, you need to make choices. So it's not as simple as just putting a bus here and a bus there. You need to actually make sure you use your resources in an effective way, and actually address the issues that matter to the most vulnerable and people who live in poverty. So it's quite easy to actually say we need to do everything, but we can't. But it's something that we need to actually argue for in terms of making sure that we do level up. And the leveling up agenda is probably not about infrastructure, but it's about people. It's about how you level up people in terms of the opportunities. So this is quite a complex area. In terms of all buses, I remember some months ago that we were arguing about all trains. You know, we were waiting for ages to get these new trains on the tracks. And again, you know, we were fighting with Network Rail and the Department of Transport to get these new trains on the track. So we need to do the same for the buses, you know, make sure that we get new buses. But again, we can only do what we can do with the resources we have. So we need to actually make sure we lobby government together to make sure that, you know, we do level up. And again, there's a north-south debate there as well. So it is very, very complex, Mayor. But I welcome the report, and I know you're trying your best to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure everybody benefits. But there are issues there that are beyond your control, beyond my control. I need to make sure we keep on lobbying hard to make sure everybody benefits. Thanks, Mayor.
And to reflect that, I'm really pleased that the capped fare is £4.50, which is incredibly ambitious and potentially much more affordable for people who are travelling on a multitude of journeys. Councillor Lewis and then Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I'll make two very pithy points. I read between the lines of what you were saying earlier. I think, first of all, I welcome the ambition of this plan as it's set out, and being very clear of what we expect from our public transport rather than what we get given. I think if levelling up was more than just an empty slogan, we wouldn't be having to bid for this, we would be given it with a bow on. I regret that we have to go through rounds of bids for basic public transport that people in the south enjoy, but that's where we are, and I do welcome the ambition of this bid.
Thank you. And certainly the beauty contest nature of it is very frustrating and time consuming and takes up enormous resources. So let's hope we do well from this bid. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I'll try and be equally as pithy. The mention of Flexibus and East Leeds DRT, I think, is something to be applauded, and actually we should be seeking to go even further in what we do, particularly looking at how that might benefit rural areas and urban areas, and where people are looking to access the facilities. So there's a healthcare facilities, education facilities and others, so we can target interventions. Park and ride isn't mentioned in there. That is something that is rumoured to be coming forward in my own ward, and there's discussions about sites. I'm delighted Councillor Waller is here, because if we got other sites in my ward, what it would do is mean that we don't just have a park and ride that connects people into Leeds, but we look at where we can connect to Wetherby, to York, to Tadcaster, to other areas, and start to think not just about park and rides taking people into city centres, but how we look at going even further to other areas and make sure we connect people up to different transport across Yorkshire, not just across West Yorkshire. And finally, for Liz, the point was made about gender neutrality on there. If it was the choice of the, and maybe might be others that want to come in on this, it might be Dave, if the combined authority wished to, could they look at something like a reduction for women who were on mat leave as part of a gender neutrality process? So there was reduced rates for those people, and if they wanted to access that, and try and encourage them and to use the buses more, particularly when we think about them accessing healthcare facilities. Thank you.
Do you want to come in, maybe Dave on park and ride and Liz on mat leave?
Yeah, on park and ride, whilst park and ride is clearly a bus, I think it's also a part of the local council's parking strategy in terms of moving. So we tended to see that more in that in the arena of the local transport strategies that the local councils bring forward. But the park and ride is a very valid and indeed very successful sort of approach to reducing demand. So I think we can go back, and we've still got a little bit of time to look at the cross references in that sense and pick that up.
It's an interesting suggestion. I've been thinking of it through the lens of the network, but I hadn't really thought about it around fares. So it's one we can have a look at. I think, I'd want to see it from a paternity perspective, but let's have a look at it. I mean, all we can do to try and do what we can. Obviously, that will have an impact on. It needs to be paid for from somewhere. So it's the funding. We're back to the funding situation. We've yet to see what we're going to get for the revenue through this in order to see what we might need to prioritise.
And if it's helpful, what I'm hoping is that the fares are affordable for absolutely everyone, whether you're in work, whether you're on mat or paternity leave, that it's affordable to use the bus. So I'm really pleased that we've got to where we are with this report. Ben, you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Just two very brief points from me. One, this bidding document is trying to start from the perspective of people and the fact that people live complex lives, and how do you create a public transport network that can cater for that, based around bus, but as you said, involving kind of different types of bus delivery model as well. So we're hoping it really is ambitious and is at the heart of what the combined authority's priorities are. That said, it is a bid document, and the annex that you've been sent around separately that we might consider in the private session is very much a work in progress. And we've had comments over the course of the week that are not reflected in the current document. So when we have that conversation, please take it in that spirit. Thank you.
Okie doke. So are we wanting to, we're beyond time, but we have the room until 1 o'clock. If members are happy to stay for a moment, we could discuss in private the BSIP submission. Is that something people would like to do? Do you want to discuss in more detail? If you're happy to end where we are today, could you please raise your hand? Okay, all right. So are we happy then to approve the combined authority and our submission, our BSIP submission, and agrees to delegate any final changes to the managing director in consultation with myself? The BSIP will be submitted to the Department of Transport before the deadline of the 30th of October 2021. So we're all happy to do that. And yes, thank you. And if I may add my thanks to Councillor Groves and also to the officers and Dave's team who have collated this document in a really vibrant way that's incredibly bold and just shows our ambitions for our region and for our people. So thank you all so much for coming. Just double checking whether there is any final thoughts, any other business? All good. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We have slightly run over, so I've broken my duck of being able to finish on time. But thank you very much. And also the next meeting is the 9th of December. Thank you. Have a great day.